Well, this is it. We have finally made it to the end of the semester here in American Government class. And today we are going to look at a review video for the final exam. And hopefully you will study hard for this. As I mentioned in class, this final is a quite lengthy final. And so I am praying for you. And we've had a great semester. Sure enjoyed being the teacher this year and enjoyed each of you. This final is made up, as I mentioned, it has 87 questions plus an essay and a few bonus questions there as well. And so you can actually get over 100% if you get a perfect grade. The final has questions as tedious terms, all the terms provided, and you have to fill which term goes with the question. There is tricky true and false. And of course, as you know, I do like to be a little bit tricky there, so just be real mindful that you read the questions very carefully and think about, is that a true statement or not? And then there is the matching section, matching the amendments with their description. Once again, I have taken the same amendments that were on the quiz and placed them on the test. Obviously not in the same, necessarily, say in the same order or whatever, but the same ones are on this test. And so if you did not do well on the quiz, you better study a little bit more on the different amendments, and we'll try to review those as well. Then there's Maddening multiple choice. We have a choice between 3 different answers, and so you'll have several questions with that. Then there's a matching section. I'm just simply telling you it's matching the state government officials with what they do. Another true and false section, and then finally in the back there is an essay as well as some bonuses that will give you an opportunity to get some extra points. Please note that at the very end of this, it will simply ask you, did you read your textbook? And that is a yes or no question. There is another question that says, if you did not, how many pages did you read? So if you do come to test day and you did not finish your textbook, please at least know how many pages you read. And so tally those up. And obviously that is an honesty issue, and I hope that you will tell the truth there on that question. All right, so here goes. Here goes for our review. And once again, I'm not guaranteeing that I'll catch everything that's on the test, but I will say that I have tried to do very well at making sure I ask just about everything that's on here. I may ask some things that are not on the test, and so you'll have to go through it. If I've not said it, it's probably less likely that it's not on the test if I don't mention it. And so anyway, that will help you out a little bit there. America's righteous character is the secret to success. And we talked quite a bit about that. We have lots of natural resources. We have a lot of intelligent people. We have a great military, but those things are not what makes us successful. It is the righteous character of the American people. And we mentioned that character is revealed through its culture. We also talked about the fact that we were founded upon the the Puritan work ethic, and that is the idea that work is a gift from God and a means of glorifying Him. We mentioned as well that early on in our history, we came to the idea of the free enterprise system, which is that people have the freedom to work and make a living based on their own initiative. We also talked about the idea of limited government, whereas the government is limited by a constitution. We talked about different forms of government, and you want to know these different forms of government. Of course, there is theocracy, which is government under God, God ruling by means of prophets. We also mentioned monarchy, which is the idea of an absolute rule that is inherited, passed down through a family, with a king or queen. We have a dictatorship, which is an autocracy, where it is not by inheritance, but basically somebody acquires that power some other way. We also talked about different types of dictatorships. We talked about fascism, which is a dictator who has total power, but people are allowed private property, but the government tells them how to use it. We also talked about communism, which is a totalitarian dictatorship that happens through a violent overthrow of the government, and the government controls everything. And we talk about socialism, which is really not so much a government as much as a system of economy where the government controls the entire economy. All of those deal with dictatorships. We talk about democracy, which is rule by the people, and then, of course, our own personal government, which is a constitutional republic. And that is a system of government where people and their representatives are limited by a constitution. We mentioned that our government, our legislature, is a bicameral legislature, which means it is a two-house legislature. And that, of course, is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We mentioned that we, of course, declared independence on July 4th, 1776. And that is the date, hopefully you'll remember it, the Declaration of Independence, signed July 4th, 1776. We also had our first Constitution, which was the Articles of Confederation, and that was signed March 1st, 1781. Of course, we didn't keep the Articles very long, in that it didn't work very well for us, but the Articles of Confederation were our first Constitution. Of course, we set up originally as a confederacy, which is the idea that the central government is subordinate to state governments, and the state governments give the federal government, the national government, basically the power. And of course, that confederacy did not work very long for us. We did finally establish the need for a new constitution. Of course, that was helped along by a series of essays that were known as the Federalist Papers. And the purpose of the Federalist Papers were to show us that we needed a new constitution. There were Madison, Jay, and Hamilton were the writers of those essays. And of course, later on, James Madison became known as our father of our Constitution. He was the man probably most, influential in that process. Then we talked about the Constitution. Of course, the Constitution is made up of 7 articles and 27 amendments. And we mentioned Articles 1, 2, and 3 deal with the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, respectively. And then, of course, we mentioned Article 6 makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land. And, of course, the Constitution trumps everything. Everything is limited by the Constitution. We said that our government is a federalist government. And, of course, federalism is the division of power of government between a national and state governments. All right, and so the power is split. We mentioned that the Founding Fathers used federalism. They also used this idea of separation of powers. Now, separation of powers is the power being separated between the 3 branches of government. So if you think about it, federalism was separating the power between a national government and a state government. Separation of powers is separating the power further through an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch. And so those are the ideas there. Of course, the legislative branch making laws, the judicial branch interpreting the laws, and the executive branch executing those laws or carrying them out. We mentioned also that there are several powers that are given in the Constitution. Of course, we have reserve powers mentioned in Amendment number 10, and those are powers reserved to the states or the people. And so if the Constitution doesn't give it to the federal government, it goes to the states or the people. We've got express powers, and those are powers expressly given to the federal government in the Constitution. And then there's implied powers, and that is the idea that although the Constitution doesn't specifically say it, those powers are implied based on the responsibilities that the federal government has. We also talked about the legislative branch, of course, established in the First Amendment. We mentioned the 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives has 435 members. And you want to know that number. Of course, don't get that confused with the number of electoral votes that are available, because that would add 3 electoral votes for D.C. All right, the number of representatives is 435. We also mentioned that representatives serve for 2 years. We mentioned the Senate is made up of 100 members, 2 from each state, and that senators serve for 6-year terms. In the House of Representatives, the main leader of the House is the Speaker of the House, and he is chosen by a vote of all the representatives. And he is one of the most powerful people in the government. We mentioned in the Senate that there are a couple of governmental leaders. The first one is the President of the Senate, and that is none other than the Vice President of the United States. He doesn't do much in the Senate, with the exception that he breaks the ties if there's any tie votes. When the Vice President is not in the Senate, there is a leader called the President Pro Tem of the Senate, all right? And so the Vice President is the President of the Senate. There's another person who is called the President Pro Tem, and he leads the Senate when the Vice President's not there. We mentioned the different houses have different powers, and be careful that you know the different powers related to each of these houses. We mentioned the House of Representatives, or the lower house, has the power to introduce revenue bills. They have the power of the purse. Obviously, we wanted the people closest to our voters to control the money bags. And so only the House of Representatives can introduce revenue bills. The House of Representatives is also the one that chooses the president if no candidate receives the majority. And so we gave that very important power to, once again, the lower house. The house is closest to people. We also mentioned that the House of Representatives can impeach federal officials. All right. The Senate, on the other hand, has the power to approve all presidential treaties. They also approve any presidential appointments. All right. And they are the ones that try cases of impeachment. So don't get that confused. It's the House that impeaches and the Senate that tries all impeachment cases. All right. We mentioned these different powers. And you also want to know the clause called the necessary and proper clause. Now, I'm going to tell you that there's a couple of questions on here that deal with specific clauses that I mentioned. The necessary and proper clause is also referred to as the elastic clause. And that is the clause that kind of gives us the implied powers. It basically says that Congress has power to do whatever is necessary and proper to fulfill their duties. And so that has been kind of stretched to give Congress a lot of brand new powers that the founders probably never intended for Congress to have. We mentioned the second branch of government, the executive branch. Of course, that's found in Article number 2. And that is the branch of the presidency. We mentioned that the president is picked by the Electoral College. Is it true that we vote for the president? Not really. We vote for electors who elect the president. It's the Electoral College vote that actually picks the president. We mentioned that the president can serve for a maximum of 10 years. He can serve 2 years of 4 years each. And then also, if he could do up to 2 years of another president's term if he was vice president that became president. All right. We mentioned that the president obviously is the most powerful leader. He is the leader of our country. Then we talked about the progressive era, and we said a lot about progressivism. Obviously, progressivism was not what our country was founded upon. Our founders had quite a bit different ideals than the progressives did. And the progressives came around right around 1911 or so. A lot of their kind of ideas started taking shape. But it was the progressive President Franklin Roosevelt who really gave us progressive ideas and transferred those into actual practices in the government. And so we mentioned quite a bit about progressivism. During this time, there were different things that were going on. For instance, Ulysses S. Grant gave us the Civil Service Commission, And that was a commission that was formed to distribute government jobs based on merit and ability. Of course, before that, you had patronage, which was basically, if you support me politically, I'll give you a government job, and almost kind of a bribing of sense. And it was the Civil Service Commission that kind of led to that idea of we're going to give jobs based on merit and based on ability. We mentioned, of course, that in the bureaucracy, they're made up of several different things. They're made up of independent executive agencies, made up of independent regulatory agencies, and they're also made up of government corporations. And we gave you some examples of that. An independent executive agency would be something like NASA. It is an agency that does report to the president, all right, and they're not under the Defense Department at all. Then there are independent regulatory agencies, and of course, an example of that would be the IRS that regulates our taxes. Plenty of illustrations we gave on that. And then there's government corporations. The post office would be a good example of a government corporation. We mentioned the problem with independent regulatory agencies is that they have executive power, legislative power, and judicial power all wrapped up in one. And of course, we mentioned that anytime one group has total power, that can be a total disaster. And independent regulatory agencies do have all three types of power there. We also spent some time talking about the judicial branch. Of course, we mentioned that there are constitutional courts and legislative courts. We mentioned a lot of different terms, and you want to know the different terms. Of course, a plaintiff in a court case would be one who's suing, the defendant, one who's being sued. We mentioned civil cases are where people are trying to recover money. Criminal cases where the U.S. government is trying somebody for a crime. We also mentioned the different types of juries. And of course, a grand jury is a jury who examines evidence and determines whether there's enough evidence to try a person. Of course, a trial jury is the kind of jury you normally see in a trial where the lawyers present their case and try to convince the jury whether the person's guilty or innocent. We also mentioned different really important courts. Of course, we know the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, but one of the other very powerful courts is the D.C. Court of Appeals. And it's very powerful because it regulates the regulators. And you can remember the D.C. Court of Appeals because it's in the District of Columbia. That's where the government is housed, all right? That's where all the regulatory agencies are based out of. And so it's that court that regulates and has jurisdiction over them. And so that makes it a very powerful court. Of course, the most powerful court is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has both original and appellate jurisdiction. All right, they can hear any case they want to hear. They can also hear any appeal that they want to. All right, and they're very powerful. One of the unique characteristics or unique powers of the Supreme Court is that of judicial review. And we mentioned the court case in which judicial review was founded, and that is Marbury versus Madison. And I will say that there are a couple of court cases on here. Marbury versus Madison is one of those. Of course, you remember James Madison was the incoming Secretary of State, and he was sued by Marbury because he would not deliver some of the presidential appointments for judgeships that President Adams had made just before he left office. And of course, James Marshall, then the Chief Justice, said, well, we have the right to declare whether something is constitutional or unconstitutional, and we feel like we don't have the right to make the Secretary of State do his duty. And so that gave us the idea of judicial review. Also, we had quite a lengthy discussion, several different lectures on the different amendments. And as I already mentioned, we had a big quiz, we had a big matching section. All the same amendments that were on there are on the test. And I'm going to actually tell you which ones are on there, so hopefully you will get these. Amendment number 1, of course, deals with freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and the right to petition. In Amendment 1, there is a couple of clauses that you'll want to know. First, there is the Establishment Clause, and that is the clause that states that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Congress can't make a national church, basically. They can't establish religion. Also in Amendment number 1 is the Free Exercise Clause, and that states that Congress shall not prohibit the free exercise of religion. Congress cannot make a law that prohibits people from being able to exercise proper religion. We also mentioned in regards to Establishment Clause cases that the court now uses something called the Lemon Test to determine Establishment Clause cases. The Lemon Test is basically looks at any particular law and says, is the law secular in purpose? Is it neutral towards religion? And it's not excessively entangling the government in religion. And of course, we said the Lemon Test really is a lemon, but it is the test that is used to try Establishment Clause cases. Of course, Amendment number 2, the right to keep and bear arms, is found on this test. Amendment number 3, no quartering of soldiers in private homes. Amendment number 4, no unlawful searches or seizures. And of course, that deals with you have to get a warrant in order to be able to search the property. Amendment number 5 deals with the right to have a grand jury examine the evidence beforehand. Of course, a lot of times we think of I plead the fifth, as in I don't have to testify against myself. But Amendment number 5 also deals with having a grand jury, which is another important protection. We mentioned Amendment number 6, the right to a speedy and public trial. Amendment number 7, jury trials in civil cases that exceed $20. All right, so the right to have a jury trial. Amendment number 8, no excessive punishment. All right, no excessive bail. All right, the punishment must fit the crime. Amendment number 9, the unenumerated rights of the people. Although that's a complicated amendment, it's a very important amendment. That means that just because the Constitution didn't write it down, doesn't mean that that's not a right that we would have. Amendment number 10, one of my personal favorite amendments, the powers reserved to the states and people amendment. All right, and very important in limiting the federal government. Of course, we mentioned Amendment 12, and 12, 22, and 25 all deal with the presidency. Amendment 12, the first of these, establishes the election of the president and the vice president, giving the ballots where you vote together on them. All right, trying to eliminate us having a president from one party and a vice president from a different party. And so just kind of think of those as a block. Of course, we mentioned Amendment 22 deals with the presidential term, limiting it to 10 years. And then Amendment number 25 deals with who takes over when the president is disabled or dies in office. And so we mentioned that. Amendment 13, 14, and 15 are, you might say, are different civil rights amendments. And so if you can think about this as 13, 14, and 15, they're all grouped together. First, we had to abolish slavery. So that's Amendment 13. Secondly, we needed to give black Americans citizenship. So that's Amendment 14. All right. And then Amendment 15 gives black citizens the right to vote. All right. So if you can kind of think of a logical progression there, first we abolish slavery. Then we give them rights to citizenship. Then we give them the right to vote. 13, 14, and 15 are civil rights amendment. Amendment 16 is the personal income tax. And probably my most despised amendment that's given. This is kind of odd for me, but I remember this by President Lincoln. One of my favorite presidents was President 16. And one of my least favorite amendments is the income tax. All right, in Amendment number 16. Amendment 17, the popular election of senators. And of course, if you think about that, right after the Civil War, or I'm sorry, not right after the Civil War, right after the progressives started taking power, they got income tax, and then this very same year, popular election of senators, trying to get rid of states' power, to get rid of federalism a little bit. On the test is Amendment number 18 and Amendment number 21. Of course, 18 deals with national prohibition. Amendment 21 is the repeal of national prohibition. Of course, the kind of memory technique there is a person is not legally allowed to drink in the United States at 18 years of age. All right. However, in the United States, unfortunately, they are legally allowed to drink at age 21. And of course, so national prohibition, Amendment 18. Repeal of the prohibition, Amendment 21. And that would be an easy way to remember that. Amendment 19 is also on here, and that is women's suffrage, the right for women to vote. Of course, that is very important. And if you can think of 19 and Amendment 26 is suffrage for 18-year-olds and older, all right? And so both of those are on here. You can kind of think about it. A person's given the right to vote at 18, and you just add one more. That would be Amendment 19. Women have the right to vote. So, maybe that might help you remember that. Of course, Amendment number 26, it was the one before the last amendment that we allowed 18-year-olds to vote, all right? So we waited all the way to almost the end to give 18-year-olds the right to vote. We mentioned Amendment 22 already, limits the presidential terms. Amendment 23 gives 3 electoral votes to Washington, D.C. So 23 gives 3 votes. And then finally, the very last amendment, and I think it's just a great amendment there, Amendment 27, which restricts changes in in congressional salary. And of course, we mentioned kind of the special thing about this. It was an amendment proposed by James Madison, but not passed until 1992. And so kind of a funny little amendment there. All right, we mentioned state government, and we mentioned a lot of the different executive officers. I've already told you there is a matching section, matching the different state executive officers with what they do. Of course, the first officer is the governor. That is the oldest office in the United States of America, the office of the governor. You say, is it the president? No. But we had governors before we had presidents. And so the governor is the oldest executive office. It is our chief executive office in the state, all right? He would be equivalent to the president of the country. He's the president, you might say, of the state. Then we have a lieutenant governor, and that would be, of course, the equivalent of the vice president. Does many of the same things that the vice president does. He does break ties in the California State Senate or in other state senates. Then we have the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State in the state has charge of the state records, also keeps the state seal, and watches over the election laws. All right, so that is the Secretary of State. The Attorney General, of course, is the state's lawyer, and he instructs us as far as what the law is for the state. The Treasurer is the guardian of the state funds. He is the one that pays the state bills, but he has somebody that kind of looks over his shoulder, and that is the auditor. The auditor is the one that looks at the state financial records to make sure that they are legitimate. He is also the one that checks and evaluates the performance of different agencies to make sure they're performing for the money that's spent. Then there's the comptroller, and you kind of think about him as just kind of a busy bookkeeper. He's the one that actually keeps the books of the state. So the treasurer pays the bills. He's in control of the money. The comptroller writes down all the statements, and it's the auditor that looks over the shoulder and checks those statements to make sure they're accurate. Then we talked about the superintendent of public instruction, and of course he runs all the different public educational facilities, public schools, also in charge of educational law. We mentioned that the California State General Assembly of course, is once again made up of two different houses, and it's the General Assembly and the Senate. In California, the General Assembly has 80 assemblymen. In the California State Senate, it has 40 senators. So think we have half the number of senators as we do assemblymen, and that will help you remember that. 80 assemblymen, 40 senators. We talked about state courts, and we mentioned many different state courts. The lowest in the state court system is the Justice of the Peace, and of course we mentioned that's almost a dying breed. There's not as many Justice of the Peace as there were in past days. Then we have general trial courts. You want to know that the general trial courts are the courts of record, and they are the ones where you actually go on record. They have clerks that take transcripts of the different trials. We mentioned also, we talked quite a bit about local government, and we mentioned that the largest unit of local government is the county. Of course, then under county there are cities and their towns and so forth. But as far as local government, the county is the largest member. We talked about different county officials. Of course, sheriff, he's the chief law enforcement officer. County assessor appraises property taxes. The treasurer is the one that collects different funds. The auditor, once again, supervises the financial records. Then you have the county clerk that maintains all the different records and also supervises the local elections. The district attorney, and of course, he's the lawyer for the county, prosecutes the different cases. All right, and so we mentioned that. Don't get confused. We have two tax questions on the test. Sales tax is a chief revenue source for states. Of course, sales tax, states. Remember S and S. Sales tax with states. Property tax with local government, like county government, all right? So the property tax is where the county government, the local governments get their money from. We finished up in the last lesson talking about American federalism. Of course, we said it several times that the founders founded the government as a federal government, not a unitary government, not a confederate government, but a federal government. And we mentioned, of course, that deals with powers divided between the national and state government. And really, it's power divided amongst even all the local governments. And in this lesson, we talked about the fact that there are over 85,000 governments in the United States of America. And we mentioned that today, a lot of those powers, are getting changed. Some of that has to do with the necessary and proper clause, where the elastic clause, they've stretched that. The doctrine of implied powers was established in a court case, and we mentioned this last lesson, McCulloch versus Maryland. And that gave us the doctrine of implied powers. And of course, we mentioned that the state of Maryland was trying to was trying to tax the Bank of the United States. And Mr. McCulloch, the bank cashier, refused to pay the taxes. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, state of Maryland, you can't tax a federal bank, all right? And so that gave us the idea of implied powers, all right? And we mentioned that. We mentioned the history of federalism. Of course, if you remember right, I stated that you'll want to know in depth the history of federalism in this country. And of course, the founders did found a federal government. And right at the beginning of the founding, we had what was called dual federalism. And that was the idea that the national government dealt with national issues. The state and local governments dealt with local issues. The national government did what was their job to do, and they did not interfere with the state government and the state job. And the state governments did their job, and they weren't to interfere in the national scene. And they could work together on things, but they needed. But under dual federalism, they kept distinct powers. They could cooperate, but they did not specifically combine their powers anyway under dual federalism. We saw during the Progressive Era, 1913 to 1964, there started to be a change in federalism, and it became known as cooperative federalism. And of course, during that time, the country passed the 16th Amendment, which gave the federal government the right to tax individuals their incomes directly instead of taxing the states like it had been done before. And that gave the federal government a lot of money. And the federal government began taking that money and giving out grants and giving out different money to states and basically trying to help states with different issues that they had. And basically they would say, look, we'll give you some money to fix this issue or maybe to build a highway in your state. But they would issue kind of a few instructions. If you do take our money, you kind of have to do this or you kind of have to do that. And so the states began taking in that federal money and using it to better their states. They kind of got addicted to federal money. And in 1964, during a lot of the civil rights issues and things that we had, there started to be what was known as coercive federalism. And that is where the federal government started stepping in saying, now that you have our money, you will do these things. We started seeing that the federal government started actually putting more mandates than actually benefits to these federal funds. They not only started saying, you got to use the money for this case, but they also started saying, this is how you will spend your own budget. And today, under coercive federalism, we see that it is the federal government that tells the states how to spend a good majority of their money. And this was helped along by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, under the Due Process Clause, basically said that state governments are under the Bill of Rights just like the federal government. The Bill of Rights wasn't meant for state governments. It was meant for to limit the national government. But under the Due Process Clause, the Supreme Court said states are kind of under that as well. And so now the federal government really, they almost gave the federal government the right to tell the states exactly what they have to do. The court began also issuing court orders, which said, states, you have to do this, you have to do that, and gave Congress the right to override anything pretty much that a state says. And today we see that federalism is really a coerced federalism. State governments have lost a lot of power. And as a result, we are strongly moving towards, and very quickly moving towards, a unitary type government. That is a very good summary of what is on the test. I hope that you'll study hard. I have been praying for you. Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, and looking forward to grading some good tests. And so be praying for you and thinking about you. God bless you.